This is afternoon now, so good afternoon, everybody. Dear Mark, thank you very much for inviting me. Excellencies, it's great to see friends here always and always meet new students. I must say this is one of my favorite places in the world. Whenever I am invited and I have time, I'm coming. Because you see here, I've got my three identities always behind me. I'm a Hungarian flag. I'm a European. I'm a true European, and I'm a global citizen, the UN flag. And I think you can have these different identities very beautifully living together in the same body and mind and soul. So yes, when I saw the title of this conference, I was thinking, dancing and singing nations closer. And immediately, I was thinking actually about Matisse. I didn't know the young lady that she would talk about this painting, but that's what I saw. This is what we do, we diplomats. I just would like to say that actually yesterday, because I met you all here yesterday, we celebrated the International Day of Living Together in Peace. That's a United Nations Day. We didn't know, or it was not told you probably yesterday, but I think it was very symbolic. The problems we discussed yesterday, the people spoke yesterday, they were all talking about that. How on earth can we do that? Just to say that the UN General Assembly, with a resolution, created this special day, International Day, but it was not creating only an international day, but this is a topic for us all the time, because it was the International Year of a Culture of Peace in 2000, and in 1993 it proclaimed the period for 2001 and 2010 the International Decade for a Culture of Peace and Non-Violence for Children in the World. And in 1999, when actually I set up the Hungarian Culture Center in London, because I did 20 years television and I did 20 years diplomacy, really. In 1999, the General Assembly adopted the Declaration and Program for Action on Culture and Peace. So these are the topics which has been going on for the global family, for the European family, and for all the countries wherever you live. I would say that our deliberations on peace and the way to foster will remain abstract. Musing, if we don't apply them to the real life, to the real situations and people on the ground, if we do not try to make a real difference. Sometimes we forget that despite the periods of conflicts, people have lived together for ages, mixing with and learning from each other, exchanging views, experiences, adopting various elements of the other's cultures. So the task before us is to identify those cultural phenomena that have historically glued the communities of different backgrounds together. So for me, these cultural unifying factors can be found, of course, in literature, oral and written traditions, artistic expressions, sites of common cultural heritage, even the examples of gastronomy. So for me, these cultural unifying factors are really important. And understanding the indigenous forces and processes that promote mutual acceptance and cooperation is, I would say, the first step towards relearning how to focus on these positive factors and how to build trust. And the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind, of course, can only occur when we start to respect and even celebrate our cultural diversity. We talked about really, actually, so much already. But I would say, for me, diversity is never a burden. cultural diversity is really a fantastic source of inspiration. So there is a race among the world's physicists to identify and explain the basic forces that drive the universe. I'm sure you all read about that. And the pressing task for us is to identify the forces that drive complex relations between nations and societies around the world. So the elements of the so-called soft power we heard yesterday from His Excellency, culture diplomacy, science diplomacy, education, international communications, and so on, that have for so many decades brought together societies, peoples from different countries and continents, have defined common values and aspirations across national boundaries. But will ever soft power increasingly become the force behind a peaceful world of the future? Actually, does the notion of a peaceful world exist at all? Actually, are we human beings born to be peaceful at all? These are, of course, questions for another lecture. But in my view, what is commonly viewed as a soft is actually today's globalized world more potent, more tangible, and more consequential than the so-called hard power, with all its traditional economic and military leverages of influence. Culture diplomacy or international scientific cooperation are the ways for us to build trust and at least try to understand each other. Using education, of course, giving scholarships are very strong forms of soft power diplomacy, because that's a great starting point for everybody, at least to try not to misunderstand the other. And I'm sure you all know, and probably you have already got the Fulbright scholarship, but Fulbright said that in the long course of history, having people who understand your thought is much greater security than another submarine. So I remember when I first talked at the Security Council in the United Nations, which was, of course, a big change in my life, being purely interested and focusing on culture diplomacy in London and in Paris at UNESCO. I was sent to UN, which is, of course, the center of security and peace and the Security Council. So no one really talks about culture or the role of culture in the Security Council. And I was talking about the dialogue, the real understanding of the dialogue. Being a European, of course, brought up by all the philosophies in Europe, we knew that dialogos is a Greek compound word widely mistranslated and wrongly understood because of confusion between the duo and the dia. It doesn't mean a conversation between two people, but it means that actually you have to be free enough to give the space to the thoughts of the other. And probably at the end of the day, you will both changing your positions. And actually, dialogue is, according Peirce's enterprise, for it implies a risk as well. So politicians don't really like it. I met many who said, of course we are in dialogue. And when I asked them, so what is the dialogue for you? He said, well, I'm speaking and you are listening. And of course, this is not what we are talking about. So talking about dancing and singing nations together, as Mark Domfried put into the title of our forum, it means for me using the power and examples of music and art to show how people can work together. I really see our global culture space as a multi-layered treasure, as a music box. You know, when you open it up, it comes always with a new music. And the process of inspiration followed by the creativity of people working together is, to me, the most beautiful aspect of this varied culture space. There was a Hungarian conductor in the 20th century, Sir Georg Solti, and he created the orchestra called the World Orchestra for Peace. It was created for the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. And here is a footnote. The idea came from two women, his wife and the wife of Boutros Boutros-Ghali, who was then the Secretary General of the United Nations. I happen to know well, we were good friends with all the two families. And of course, the women told me, oh, yeah, that was our idea, because we wanted really to show something to the world what is international collaboration. So whenever you play in an octet, in a sextet, in a quartet, not to mention an orchestra, you know what is international collaboration, so you can do it. You have to listen, you have to look at the other, you know, you have to share, and at the end you are creating something together. And I think in culture diplomacy, this is what I have argued always for, the process, the creative process in which we are working together is really very important. As the maestro put it nicely, he said, the unique strengths of music we want to show to the world as an ambassador for peace. Another Hungarian great composer and conductor, and musicologist Zoltán Kodály, of course, created a method. It's called the Kodály method or the Kodály concept, and it's all about singing. For a child, as a young person, to learn to sing, and for many children, young people, and later on, people singing together. And it was actually in 2016 inscribed as a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage. You heard about that yesterday. And actually last year in Paris at the General Conference, we decided to create an International Day of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And I must say that was the creation of the International Day, which I remember from my years the easiest, because there is an important feeling to intangible cultural heritage in every country and in every culture. And what is important about music, and I always argue, it doesn't matter if you don't become a musician, but you have to learn music because it helps you to coordinate, to remember, to focus. And even if you practiced and your technique is brilliant, you still haven't made music, because it comes only when you put your soul and heart in it. And that's the same with diplomacy. You have to concentrate, you have to coordinate, you have to know, you know, your job. But if you don't put your heart and soul in it, you can't build a trust. And we are, after all, talking about trust building. So that's why my guiding philosophy in my life came from the third great Hungarian musician, Béla Bartók, who said, my guiding philosophy has always been the idea of different nations uniting into brotherhood, in spite of all the wars and hostility. I have tried to serve the aims of this idea as best as I can in my music. So for that reason, I don't shrink away from any influences. And that's why he collected all the music of the Carpathian Basin. But also he went to Africa, he went to the Arab world, and interestingly enough, you can see throughout understanding his work how music travels in the whole world. So we Hungarians, of course, went through this cross-fertilization process, which I think is very important. And it's a very positive way of absorbing other cultures, but also being someone who can inspire other cultures. So placing our collective skills at the service of humanity and working towards a more meaningful and sustainable future is really what we are looking for when we are doing soft power diplomacy. And you will agree with me that we have to renew our commitment to understanding and tolerating and respecting each other's cultural background and identity. And whenever I speak about that, I always quote the great 13th century Islamic scholar. I really love to read his work, Rumi, because he said, half of me comes from here, half from everywhere. Half of me comes from the pearls of the sea, half from distant shores. So we have to keep this in mind all the time. This is who we are. We people of the world are connected to each other globally. And today that kind of interdependence is very visible. You know, with social media, we can't hide. You know, we can inspire each other. We can influence each other. It's not something what you can read about only in books. Now, for that, it is in a very beautifully way manifested, obviously, in dances, and especially in round dances. Because have you ever wondered about the captivating rhythm and mesmerizing movements of the round dance? The round dance symbolizes, obviously, unity, spirituality, cultural identity, with a circular formation representing the interconnectedness of all living beings. The round dance holds great historical significance and is deeply rooted in various cultural contexts. It has been a part of human cultures for centuries, with its origins dating back to ancient times. And this dance form has been practiced by indigenous communities. Just think about North America or Africa, or in many various European communities, like in my community, the Magyar culture, the Hungarian culture is very rich of that as well. And it is often accompanied by powerful drumming and singing. The voice and drum and dance, this is all working together. And it's performed, of course, important events, ceremonies, and used for storytelling and preserving intangible cultural heritage we talked about. So the traditional round dance steps and movements are carefully choreographed and passed down through generations. Now, the historical significance of the round dance lies in its role as a community activity. It has been used as a way to bring people together, fostering social connection and unity within the community. It is powerful expression of harmony with both the natural world and the community. That's also an important element, because the dancers move in a clockwise direction, symbolizing the continuous flow of energy and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Life, death, and rebirth. So, as I said, the vocal harmonies in the round dance add another layer of depth and beauty to the overall experience. As the dancers move in a circular formation, their voices blend together in perfect harmony, and they really can create an eternal atmosphere. We know that dance has long been a fundamental aspect of human culture. Across the world, various cultural traditions utilize dance as a form of ritualistic expression, often reflect historical events, mythologies, beliefs, and related to the community's identity. If you think about diplomatic meetings, bilateral or multilateral diplomatic events, which I've been doing in my life all the time, you need to be prepared by all these items. You have to understand the historical events, the mythologies, the spiritual beliefs, encapsulating the essence of the community's identity. Before you sit down someone, before you have an important meeting, especially if it's a multilateral one, meaning you have many people playing the role in this discussion, you have to be prepared. Throughout my presidency in UNESCO General Conference, I have focused on cultural diplomacy and on promoting the importance of exploring the diverse culture identities and traditions through education. I believe that people should first learn, and there was a question about that. First, they should learn about their own identity. They have to know where they are coming from. They have to be well-grounded. And then they are not afraid, or less afraid, of coming out from their body envelope, I would say. They would be much more secure, you know, communicating, working to or with the others. Facing today's complex challenges, proactivity is very necessary in diplomacy, and we have to address the multidimensional root causes of conflicts through prevention, mediation, and the protection of human rights and sustainable development. Now, in preventive diplomacy, I would like to see much stronger and more often used culture diplomacy. Many failures come that we don't use preventions. In the United Nations, very often the problem comes from that they are solving problems, right? Or the conflicts, but they are not preventing them. If we would use soft power diplomacy, if we would build really international relations through culture and understanding through culture, education, science, and communication, then, you know, we would have a better chance. That's very important to say that tolerance we talk about is not enough. I don't think so. It's a very nice word anyway. I tolerate you. No. I think we need mutual acceptance. Actually, as we have a theme today of Africa, I would like to say, coming from Europe, of course, my whole philosophy was based on that. But when I started to learn about the philosophies in Africa, especially Ubuntu I came across with, you know, I learned a lot. Meaning, I am because I belong. And this is what we all have to learn. I am because I belong. So to educate people to the future, we of course also have to understand the importance of empowerment of women. And whenever I speak, I always talk about that. And many men, colleagues, always ask me, why on earth always you are talking about that? I created the Circle of Women Ambassadors at the United Nations, also in UNESCO, now in Hungary. And then my colleagues asking me, male colleagues, you know, what are you doing there, you women? And I said, you know, when it will be not only, let's say, 15%, max 20%, at the moment not so bad, it's already 20% in the United Nations, SPR, the permanent representatives of women, then you can have your circle. But we have to rise up again, I would say, together. That's important. We also have to learn that when we are talking about women empowerment, it is not something out of the blue happening. Women have to support each other as well, and we need he for she man. And that's a beautiful movement. I'm hoping that all the men who are in the room are he for she, because we have to do it together. You know, I'm very lucky I had a he for she father. He didn't know that, of course, because this notion wasn't alive that time. I have a he for she husband who has been supporting me throughout the whole way in my life. And I raised a he for she son. And now I have 2 grandsons, and I'm raising them already being he for she. So this is something what we have to do together, women and men. Because obviously I've seen the lack of using that kind of approach coming from a woman diplomat or a peacemaker or someone taking part in a conflict resolution or peace building, because women were not invited to the table. But for example, let's think about Colombia, where they invited women from both the rebel side and the government side. They were both invited. Okay, from both sides they were invited. So they put together a story which were very important for women wherever they were. And of course they also prepared a kind of reconciliation after the war. So tolerance is not enough, mutual acceptance with women in it. That's why I don't want to talk too much about education. We heard previously from the Prime Minister how important it is, but I also put into my paper that educating girls especially is very important. I remember when I worked, and today I'm trying to use these African examples. I worked in Senegal because we had a program there for women and girls. We had programs for them to learn to read and write, but not only that, but also to learn, to give them competencies, whatever. And it was very difficult for them to join this program. And I didn't understand why. I mean, it's so good for them. Why don't they do that? And then I realized because the man of the family didn't want them to join the program. So I then went to see the man, and I started to work with the man so that they understood that they don't have to feel threatened, but it would be good for the families and for the communities when the women have got competencies and can contribute to the well-being of the family life as well. So again, we have to do it together, but it's very important that everywhere in the world, this is a program which has to be fulfilled in a way of a round dance, because I like the concept of round dance. This is a never-ending story. And also with the round dance, you will like to know that we've been talking about whatever we've been doing in our life, especially now I'm talking about diplomacy, that you need to have the physical fitness, you have to know how to improve coordination, you have to have the mental stimulation, and you have to have the emotional well-being. You got all that from round dancing, okay? Music, dance, singing. You don't have to be a professional, but you will be a much more fulfilled and prepared person, human being. So all these elements are really very important for good diplomats. And in a way, I think we are all talking about how to build trust. And in the United Nations, probably one of the biggest problems that it's very difficult to build trust anymore amongst nations and cultures. I am blessed because I have been round dancing the world, working with different cultures, peoples, and countries. And I really would like to say at the end that the very first round dance in Hungary is called the Karikazo, and this is an all-maiden round dance, meaning it's an all-woman dance. How interesting, okay? It's a very, very ancient dance, because women already had to know how to work together, how to collaborate, how to look at each other, how to help each other. So even in our dances, this phenomena is there, and it's very obvious. So time and again, determined not to see their country slide back into conflict, women have proven their tremendous potential, and that's why I would like to see, as a diplomat, more and more the power and knowledge and talent be used of the women in diplomatic circles and in peace building, in conflict resolution, and in peace talks. I don't want to go to details, but I just told you some examples about that. And I also had the chance to visit many countries as the Vice President of UN Women governing body, to see really how in remote places women are looking for their voices, and how in remote places we can help them for them to realize it is so important for them, you know, to take part in the public life and to be able to communicate really what they would like to do, what they know, and so on. So women are often seen solely as the victims, and this is another subject I'm not exploring, but it's very important to see, of the violent conflicts, and we often forget about that. This picture is really misleading, because women play an indispensable role in solving the conflict and ensuring lasting peace. So finally, just a political example. what dance and music means. I was brought up in the time of communism and Soviet dictatorship in Hungary. When I was young, like you were, we had the Soviet army with us. And of course, you know, we were censored all the time. Our ideas were censored all the time. So how on earth you keep your independence and you fulfill your dreams? In the 1970s, a dance movement called the Tanzhaus, it's called the Dance House movement, swept the youth of the nation because the young people were disillusioned with communism and Soviet domination, and they began asserting their Hungarian national identity by nurturing their unique dance traditions. So for 50 plus years, this dance house movement continued to be very, very popular. It is still there, and this is all about, obviously, aiming to evoke and revive the pattern of local communities, preserving its aesthetic values. And the dance house movement method was also inscribed in 2011, when I was the president over there, on UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Don't forget that it expanded independently from a centrally supervised cultural establishment without the control of the Communist Party. It seemed to be dangerous from ideological point of view because it could have involved the ideas of national identity, liberty, and self-organized communities as well. Just another example, the same happened to jazz. Jazz was not allowed for us to listen, and I know places in the world I visited where jazz is not allowed yet because they don't know what's happening tomorrow, in the next minute. They don't know what they are going to play, how they are going to work together. So music has got something else. It's not only playing music, it is always what is behind. And if any one of you will become a diplomat or a culture diplomat, don't forget, you don't organize a concert just for the concert's sake. You do it because you have something in your mind what you want to tell, a story to tell. Otherwise, you organize a concert in the Barbican and Festival Hall or whatever, and that's something different. So you have to have the best quality and interesting approach, but you have to know why you are doing that. So of course, the classic way becoming a diplomat is working in the Foreign Office, studying politics, international relations, languages, economics, and humanities. But I argue that understanding emotions and human behavior is as important skills as the professional preparation for your career. You have to relate well, of course, also to the new formats of communication. I don't want to go into details how and what we had to learn during COVID. You have to be a great communicator, and you also have to know how to use all these gadgets and how to use the different formats of diplomacy. But I would say the way you have to be a good psychologist in order to becoming a good diplomat, probably you have to be a good dancer too. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is this mine or someone already used it?
I'll give you
Probably. Mine is there, over there. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you.
So,
Very good afternoon, ma'am. It
Hi.
was a pleasure listening to you. And
Where are you from?
I'm from India.
India, okay.
Yeah. And thank you very much for a wonderful speech. And I was listening to you when you said that it's very important for a woman to give chances to another woman, and that definitely plays an important and a pivotal role, and that set a social impact in the organization. So I have a question for you. So when we talk about the female leadership, ideally I do not consider it as a female or a male leadership. I consider it as just a leadership. Now that we are talking about a female leadership,
No,
so
we talk about a good leadership.
good leadership. Actually, it's a good leadership
Coming from a woman or a man.
coming from a woman.
But
or a
women
man.
can do it as well.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes,
Okay.
and yeah, and how do you think that? What is its impact on the organizational culture, and what is its impact on the societal culture?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, of course, if I think about India, I don't know whether you know, Miss, that your greatest woman artist, Amrita Shergill, is Hungarian, half Indian, half Hungarian. So she became really, I would say, the first real feminist in India with her bold approach, not only as an artist, but in her lifestyle and so on. So she influenced a lot of artists in India, not only in the world where she lived before. When I talk about the culture of the organization, I want to share with you the historic moment what we had at UNESCO. You had yesterday Irina Bokova here, right? There was a moment when the president, the director general, and the chair of the executive board were women. I was running the general conference, Irina was running the organization, and a Russian ambassador was running the executive board. 3 Eastern European women. It will never happen again. I'm sure that, whoever came then to us, it was in between 2011 and 13, were thinking how on earth these 3 Eastern European women took over the world. Okay, we didn't really, but this is what they said. But I think it was a lesson what we had to learn back in our past. That actually for us it was normal. We had to learn, we had to study. I mean, it was not something what we later on realized that, for example, in the West, people, women, girls went to college or university to find a husband and then to stay at home, and that's it. Because, in the time we were brought up, we are sort of the same age, we could have not done that. I remember when I finished university, 22, 23, my mother asked me, and where are you going to work? Because if I hadn't had a job by September, I would have been taken by the police. So what I'm saying, of course, it's very important to see what kind of culture background you are coming from. So we were brought up in a way that we women had to contribute, we had to work, we were part of the society in that sense as well. The most important part of that, I think, and of course we have a great politician and diplomat with us who was a foreign minister of Cyprus, and a woman, she will tell you more about that, but as I see it, is first of all, according to my experience, wherever I went in my life, in a way you become a role model for many young girls and women. Really. At least, they can say, yeah, she did it, or you can do it, so I can do it as well. And that, you have to take it seriously. That's why I believe today that I'm doing a lot of mentoring work for young women, mainly, of course, diplomats, because I never forget the journey I had to go through. So you are a role model. You have to act according to that. This is a responsibility. If you run an organization as a woman, you always take into consideration the need of the other women. And that is very important. So when we were running international organizations, obviously, which probably would have not been considered, we always considered. And even you can be an ambassador. I mean, I'm a so-called international gender champion. What does it mean? It means that you don't organize a conference if you don't have half-half. It's much more difficult, I must say, because normally there are the names, right? You normally invite to a conference, a panel. you probably have to think a little bit more. If you want to put together, women and men experts in the same panel, you just have to give more energy into it. The other, if you run a workplace, whatever place it is, you can do it a woman-friendly place. If you know that your colleague has children, or your colleague, either they are women or men, they have children, you have to take it into account. Or when someone is pregnant, you have to take it into account. I've seen many workplaces in which actually women were told not to become pregnant and not to give birth to children because, that would jeopardize their career. It happens in many parts of the world as well. And so if you have this way of thinking, you have to think about the position, the life conditions of the other women as well. And if you sit at the table and you make your policies, you have to put the concept of that the half of the society, normally women, you have to know and think about this concept when you make the policies, that you have to take into the consideration what are the needs of the women as well. And I think these are probably, according to the result of, for example, the peace process as well, have shown it, that when you have the women at the table, they will put something into the paper which probably would have been not put. Just think about the main document of the United Nations. If there were no women, it would be only the word man in the document. And by the way, the concept that men and women got into, the founding paper, that was because we had some women diplomats, who took part in the discussions. So it is just that very important that you take into consideration the other half of the world as well, and that of course changes the culture of the organization, I would think.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I have two questions. The first one is on UNESCO, in collaboration with partners, has developed a recommendation to guide the ministries of education around the world on preventing early and unintended pregnancy to the young mothers to continue with education in a safe environment. But still, the problem is there.
Yeah.
A lot of young girls are not going back to school after delivery, regardless of your recommendation, regardless of the recommendation from UNICEF. So I need to hear from you to get your views regarding this. How are we going to help these young mothers to go back to school after delivery? Then the second question is it's a very little question. I just want to know why Israel is not a UNESCO member.
Okay. I start with you said the small question is the biggest question ever. I mean, I was the president of General Conference. I took Palestine to UNESCO. Okay, so this is a question which I can talk about you for years. In UNESCO, there were previously more attempts for Palestine to apply for a membership at UNESCO. It was, it has been going on for many years. But by 2011, I was elected in November, but by the summer, I got all the support, so it was clear that I would become the president. I was already running the negotiations between Jordan, which proposed Palestine to join UNESCO, Israel, the Arab League, European Union, and the US. The US had a bill, two bills actually, by the old Bush and Clinton, in which it said that any organization which would take Palestine as a member would us be impossible to join. Meaning, if we taken Palestine, US would leave. That was clear, because according to the bill, they were supposed to do that. And of course, we also knew that Israel would leave if Palestine would enter UNESCO. So it was a very passionate time. It was a very diplomatically probing months, because I've been cooperating with all the actors, and it was very clear for the president of Palestine, who told me that, okay, if we get an offer on the ground, something serious from the United States or from the European Union, then we would consider, but otherwise they knew that they would have a big support, so why would they withdraw? Because we knew that it would change the life of UNESCO, because we would lose a very big part of the financial support. Having said that, there were times at UNESCO when US was not member, when UK was not member, when Israel was not, so we are trying to see UNESCO an organization. At the moment we have 194 members. The UN has got 193 members. I remember I took Palestine and South Sudan in 2011. So obviously, if you want to have an international organization globally, you would like to see as many participants as many you can, but sometimes it does not happen, since the birth of these organizations, we have seen that, and the organizations were still working. So because we took Palestine, the member states decided to take Palestine, because that's democracy within the UN. You have a proposal. The proposal came from Jordan. It was supported by the Arab group. It went first to the executive board. The executive board proposed this to put on the agenda with a recommendation to the General Assembly. So obviously I had to put it on the agenda. And unless we found another solution, we knew that very probably they would have, according to the votes, because you need 2/3 of the votes, present and voting, which is very important. So it doesn't mean that all the people are there. No, present and voting means yes and no. Abstention doesn't count. And in that case, there were a lot of abstentions, but it was a very beautifully put together 2/3 majority, much bigger majority. So the yes made the vote available for Palestine to vote. And the moment, I remember, it was like, everybody, the majority was celebrating and dancing and so on. But, when you present your votes, first you present, you say that how many votes is needed for the to winning this election. You say that, and then you say how many votes they got. So it was very clear that they got in. But I didn't even have time to say, how many were the no's and how many were the abstentions. So I told all the presidents to sit down, because I want to finish, my job. So I had to I had to cool down, right? And then I gave the floor to Israel, I gave the floor to the US. They said their point of view, and all the other countries, because of course there is, after voting, there is a chance for everybody to explain. It is the explanation of the vote. So we knew the US would leave, and then we knew that Israel would leave. So that's why Israel is not member. Now, the question is why US went back, right? Because they went back now to UNESCO. And Tony Blinken, who is now the foreign minister, he was brought up in France, and her mother is UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Cultural Diplomacy, Judith Pizar. a close friend of mine, and her second husband, Samuel Pizar, became the very first special envoy, goodwill ambassador for Holocaust education and genocide education at UNESCO. So it was a family very much involved in the world and in the work of UNESCO, the educational side as well. So finally we got a foreign minister at the US who knew exactly what the UNESCO was doing, why it was important, why actually US was missing a lot of chances leaving UNESCO, because I don't want to go details now, but many countries, rising economies, new countries came into, and they started to give money for that and that and that. And of course, you saw a lot of shift within the life and the work of UNESCO. So I'm personally very happy that finally US decided and managed somehow to solve this problem with the two bills which did not permit them to stay in an organization in which they have Palestine as a member. I don't know how they did it, but they did it because we worked a lot with Obama, and he didn't want to have any presidential waiver, or he didn't want to solve this problem. That's the truth, we asked somehow to solve it, but now they solved it and they are back. And I personally believe, and I really believe in that, the only way for solving any solution is through dialogue. So I would like to see everybody member of UNESCO and of the United Nations, because otherwise, if they don't talk with each other, if they don't come to the same room, when they are speaking, then how on earth we will have the dialogue and how on earth we will solve the problem? This is really what I think. So I'm happy that the US is back, and I hope that at some point Israel will come back as well. So that's the short question you said, right? This is the $1 million question, actually. What was the other one? The education. Well, I can't go into details, but what is very important to understand with any educational questions, United Nations and all the parts of United Nations, like UNESCO, United Nations is an intergovernmental organization. So the members of the UN or UNESCO are the member states, represented by the governments. So it's not that you can say the UNESCO did that or the UN did that. We have to work together with the member states. And as I said, for example, for example, Senegal, Cambodia, many places in the world, we have been having very good relationships, working relationships, for example, with Caribbean islands, where there is a great culture background of tolerating aggression against women in families and so on, So you have to work together with the governments. And we've been working very closely together with these governments, and we managed to apply policies through the governments which would then affect the life of women and girls. So this is something very important to understand, that you have to work together with the governments. I think to raise the awareness of a problem is very important. This is what we've been doing at UNESCO in terms of the questions, what you asked about education. And also, we have to deal with realities. Just think, sir, after COVID, many young girls did not go back to schools. This is a new phenomenon. In a way, we went backwards in women empowerment and gender equality after COVID, as we were before. We know that. So very often we have to start from the beginning. Sadly, the number of the girls who did not go back to education because of the COVID has become much higher as it was before. But the policies, the programs, what UNESCO has been doing in the different countries, have been able to reach and have been able to make visible the question as well. And of course, it is not possible to give up and really to see how we can work. But think about Afghanistan. Yesterday we had an amazing talk. Come on. I mean, the biggest problem in the UN became for us, how on earth now? We have had so many programs for the girls and women in Afghanistan, you know, in the last 20 years, right? I mean, I personally worked with fantastic Afghan women and girls, and then suddenly, because of the new regime, we can't even see them, we can't even talk to them. So that kind of global organization doesn't mean that global organization can, you know, conquer the national government. We have to work with them together. I think that's important to understand.
Maybe a final question? Okay, Carl, the microphone is still up.
What an honor, Excellency. You talked about culture diplomacy so eloquently yesterday.
Ladies first, I'm sorry.
Right. Which one?
Here.
You? Okay. Hi.
Good morning, ma'am. Firstly, thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. It was so insightful.
Where are you from?
I'm from Pakistan.
Pakistan.
Yes, I'm a student here at
Oh, yes,
ICB.
we met yesterday.
We met,
yeah.
yes.
When I talked about Novruz in Pakistan.
Yes,
yeah.
of course, you did. So to basically enhance my own knowledge, and since you already mentioned the international collaborations, I would want to know what are the key challenges that the European Union is facing in terms of practicing culture diplomacy in other regions, and especially in the region of South Asia.
The European Union?
Yes.
I'm not a European Union person. I'm a UN person.
Yes.
So,
sorry, the United Nations.
It's a different approach.
No, the
what
United
the UN
Nations.
is doing and what the European Union is doing. But
yes,
I must say we have, of course, a lot of collaboration. I mean, the UN has got a lot of collaboration with the European Union. But it's very important to understand the European Union has got its policies on that subject, and actually the UN very often invites the representative of the EU to talk and to be part of the project, but the UN, you know, is different. It's very important. In the UN, European Union is so small and the world is so big. So it's a different perspective, right? So what was the basic question? The collaboration.
So the key challenges faced by the United Nations.
Yeah, for us, I mean, in the United Nations, of course, in terms of women equality, don't forget that the UN has got a long history of dealing with this question. First of all, it's great that we have a special part of the United Nations with a mandate of women's rights, and this is UN Women. I told I had the honor to serve there as vice president of the governing body, so I have worked very closely together with all the member states on that. So this special part of the United Nations, the UN Women, has been established for dealing with the human rights of the women, or women rights, whatever you call it. So this already was a very important development within the United Nations. You know, the Peking Declaration, the status of the women every year, which I would say the 2 weeks in March, which are as vivid and as interesting as I would say the high-level week of the United Nations, and probably we have more NGOs and civil society members than in any other time in the United Nations, shows that the UN is totally committed towards these issues, not only verbally, not only meaning vocally. It's not only that we talk about that, but we've been running programs, we've been listening, we've been channeling the problems, and we've been building collaborators for solving problems. And I think that is also very important. I try to a little bit in touch with that without collaboration, you can't really do anything. So the concept of the UN, of course, is that you have to find partners whom you can work with. And of course, that's the normal way in the United Nations to work, because at least you have always the representative of the different regional part of the world. So already, you are forced to absorb the different approaches coming from different parts of the world to work together. As I said, the biggest problem, what we have been facing really, is the setup, what the UN has been talking about very openly. It's like going back in time instead of going forward. We realize much more difficulties for girls and women to go back to school. We realize there are much more attacks on women in home, in workplaces. So in a way, we at the UN, we have realized that the biggest problem is to reset the whole process, and this is serious. Sadly, the numbers coming from different member states showed that the status of women has become less favorable as it was before, after COVID. And that's a big challenge, so in many ways. But of course, the UN and all the parts of, because the UN is so big and we have different parts and organizations within the UN. Main idea is that we would like to give the chance for everybody to study, girls and women to study. And then, it depends on the part of the world, whether it's a study of reading or the studying competencies or lifelong learning, what is also an important notion coming from the UN system and actually related also to the European Union. So everything starts with education. And education, as Excellency was just talking about, doesn't mean that you educate only reading and writing and history. You educate women and girls for their own rights, for them to have the role, to go for it, to believe in themselves, to how to collaborate, how to work together, and so on. So actually, education is probably the strongest aspect, and in terms of the human rights part or the women rights part, obviously fighting for women living in free and free society, free community in which they are not punished. Because sadly, obviously, we have a lot of data, in which we can read how they cannot fulfill their potential or their talent or at all be part of the community. And it's not only being part in politics, it's part in public life, or it's part in everyday life as well.
So final question, Ambassador Carla. Something brief. Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, I just loved your lecture.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
because you have an opera singer wife. That's why.
And I'm also a part-time musician.
Right. Okay.
My whole life I've been there. So your message I can only completely subscribe to all of it, including your very strong advocacy for the gender equality in the world, which is really the big issue, I think. But another issue which is of much concern for me, you speak about education and all various aspects of it. We see, not only because of the war, but it's a tendency which has been going on for more than 10 years, that the role of music and arts in education is sinking. We know it's almost a natural law that in a government, the prime minister and the prime minister say we have to do some savings. We know that the first victim will probably be the Minister of Culture. Not necessarily the Minister of Education, but the Minister of Culture, yes. And this will have, we are already seeing many cultural institutions around the world, not particularly in Europe perhaps, who are suffering from this. And this is a big issue, and I cannot demand that you answer it,
No.
but perhaps you agree, and perhaps you see what could be done internationally and nationally in order to break this downhill tendency.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Ambassador. Yes, of course, I touched a little bit that I believe that music education doesn't mean that you will become a professional musician, but you will become a better person. You will become a more able person. You know, you will relate to people in another way. So it is very helpful, whatever job you will have later on. And in Hungary, of course, we have had a very strong tradition putting music education. That's why I said a little bit about the Kodály method into everyday life of little children already, meaning learning the language of music very early, singing, learning singing, the solfege, you know, A, B, you know, do, re, mi, and so on, and singing together. Having said that, even in Hungary, sadly, the numbers of music lessons, you know, are diminishing. But we are fighting for it, because obviously Hungarian musicians and educators and teachers feel very strongly about that. But I just gave another lecture actually on how to nurture talent. And I think in that sense, for example, we have a very good example, because, for example, the world famous Liszt Academy takes students, you know, specially talented students from a very early age. You know, you probably, you know, you are 12, 11, 13, Vásári Tamás, and so, you know, big names started when they were little children because they were recognized that they have a special talent. So I think we have a very strong project specializing special talent in a young age. It is also part of our law, of our basic law, that in Hungary it is very important to recognize early talent and to nourish early talent. I'm very happy to say that. Probably because of that, we had 2 Nobel Prize laureates last year. The very first Hungarian woman scientist, you know, who was instrumental of finding the cure of COVID, right? And another physicist. And so I would say it's always easier to recognize the talent in sport, right? We see that in the whole world somehow. People recognize it immediately, and it's part of the media, international attention. And you have to take more for recognizing talent in a young age, not to mention genius, because another Hungarian, Polgár, who raised 3 grand chess master genius women, the Polgár sisters, said that anyone can be raised to become a genius. But that's another part of a story. So what I'm saying, you are very right that we have to fight for that. We can't let the politicians to get away with that, because, you know, they would say, you know, we have to cut the budget. And in Hungary at the moment, physical education is very important, and it's compulsory at school, and also music education. And I think it should remain compulsory. And then you decide what you do with music. But I personally felt in my life, the moment I met someone who had some kind of understanding of music, I immediately was able to move on and to build the bridges. And this is what really music education means in my country. Thank you very much.
To express our sincere gratitude, Ambassador Katalin Bogyay. Thank you.